evening. Welcome to Q&A, live from Wyndham Cultural Centre in Werribee. I'm Tony Jones. We're broadcasting tonight from the heart of Prime Minister Gillard's Lalor electorate in Western Melbourne. And answering your questions tonight, British philosopher and public intellectual A.C. Grayling, the Liberal MP for Higgins, Kelly O'Dwyer, AFL player turned CEO of Richmond Footy Club, Brendan Gale, former Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police, Christine Nixon, the Minister for Immigration, Brendan O'Connor, and author and political commentator, George Megalogenis. Please welcome our panel. Thank you very much. Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Daylight Saving Time, and you can join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag that just appeared on your screen. Well, our first question tonight comes from Tim Dix.
Thank you, Tony. Kenny Rogers once sang the words, "You got to know when to hold 'em and you got to know when to fold 'em." Julia Gillard has held on to power at all costs, thus seriously damaging the Labor Party's chances of winning in September. My question to the panel is, when do you have to sacrifice your own interests for the sake of the party and, more importantly, the country?
Okay, very lively audience. George Megalogenis.
Tim, good question, but Julia Gillard thinks she can win the next election. But the more interesting point to me is I've never seen or witnessed and covered a contest quite like this between a Prime Minister and a challenger. Normally, the challenger lays down the arms in an election year because they know that there's a bigger enemy to fight. But this one just keeps going on and on and on. And that actually might inform why Julia Gillard wants to hang on to the job. She doesn't want to give it to the guy who continues to hound her in an election year. Look in the past, Peacock and Howard both had a turn at the opposition leadership. In an election year, you never heard a peep out of the loser. Hawke and Keating, Bob Hawke left the stage after Keating took the job off him. Even Mark Latham had a free run after a very divisive leadership ballot at the end of 2003. This one is unusual, to put it mildly, and I think that the personality clash is sort of 10/10 of the story here.
Do you really think it's over, George?
Do I think it's over? Well, if Labor thinks they're going to lose, these questions will come again. But Kevin Rudd has said that there are no circumstances now on that will bring him back to the job, so that's unfinished. But we did hear a bit of this last year where he was pledged his loyalty, and of course the Labor caucus was speculating the next day. So the other point to make here is that this government has not governed well. Like, it may have done a few good things, but it can't hold its show together, and you end up wondering what the hell is going on internally. We've obviously got a government representative who we might throw to.
No, we'll come back. We'll come to the government representatives in a moment. Only from Brendan Gale. You heard the question. It really implied that Julia Gillard's got no chance of winning, so she should have basically packed it in and given over the leadership.
Well, thanks, Tony, but I think a key ingredient of leadership is self-belief, and I'd concur with George. I think the Prime Minister would be inclined to think she can still win it. I think she's showed a lot of strength against very difficult odds, against an opposition leader who's playing his role as well in holding the government to account. But fundamentally, I think she must have enormous self-belief and conviction and would feel as though she could still win.
Do you share that belief?
Well, I think the polls would suggest she's got an almighty fight in front of her, and it's not looking real good.
Kelly O'Dwyer. Well, should Julia Gillard have known when to fold them, according to the question?
Well, look, just to continue on with Tim's theme with songs, I think what we're seeing is played again, Sam. You know, we're seeing the same old song being played again. This division and dysfunction that's been going on in the government has been continual since Julia Gillard actually took on the role of Prime Minister after knifing her boss. This has been ongoing. We have seen a number of leadership contests now. The most bizarre, of course, was last week, where we actually saw a contest without an actual contest. Then we were told by the Prime Minister that it was all done and dusted, that there was nothing to see and everybody should really just take, you know, a deep breath and move on. Then the following day, we saw the resignation, after the sacking already of one minister, the resignation of another 4 ministers. This takes to the total 8 senior government members. So this is a new team now that Julia Gillard's had to put together. She's got effectively a kitchen cabinet on her backbench. The only link to the past previous functional government with the Hawke-Keating years are those ministers who are now no longer in her cabinet. Frankly, you know, the way I look at it, she was part of an 18-person cabinet plus herself over the last 3 years. 50% of those people have gone. It's a dysfunctional government.
Anthony Grayling, how does this look to a visiting philosopher?
Well, I feel very diffident about commenting on the pain of the situation for those who are feeling pain. It does put me in mind rather of what was said about the great philosopher Bertrand Russell, who had a very clean mind because he changed it so often. And as you know, here in Australia, you seem to be getting a reputation for changing your leaders of both parties on a frequent basis. And maybe this is your subconscious desire for clean government.
Christine Nixon.
I've occasionally used that line, and I think the last bit is you're going to know when to run. But I think I think that the
Should she have run?
No, I don't think so. And I think that she has stayed and she'll fight. And she'll fight to the end, and now hopefully she gets a team around her that will support her as well. I think she's done a really good job. I think she's taken a lot of criticism that she shouldn't have had to take. And so I think she's got some really good challenges in front. They've got 6 months, and I'd like to see her stay and fight.
Brendan O'Toole. So, Werribee is saying stay and fight, but the rest of the electorate not so sure.
Oh no, I think last week was a very tough week for the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party, of course, and it was clear to everybody that it was a tough week and a shocking week in many respects. But there is no appetite from this point on for any disunity. I mean, it seems to me that this country deserves to have a government who wants to be re-elected and an opposition that wants to be the alternative government. And therefore it's incumbent upon every caucus member of the government to make sure that we have a real contest of ideas and policies going to the next election. And that can only happen if dissent is quelled and unity prevails. I really do, and I've seen a number of these over the last.
I bet you've never seen one
years.
quite like this.
Well, each one is a little different, but I mean, George pointed to the fact that we've seen, the Peacock Howard shows, and we've seen tensions before. This has been very difficult, but after every quite tough ballot, there's been clear air for the leader. What has happened on this occasion, that there was not sufficient clear air since February last year. I think, and that was unfortunate, and I think that was a mistake of my colleagues not to have worked that out, that we had to resolve it. I think that firstly we have a Prime Minister who is very focused on her job and the job of delivering to the Australian people. Secondly, the Australian people deserve a contest of ideas that can only happen with a government that has a unity of purpose. And I do believe, and just from my experience of previous conflicts, if you like, is there is just no appetite for us to continue down that path. And I do believe as a result of that, we're going to see, I think, a contest that the Australian people deserve.
Okay, our next question is on the same topic. It's delving deeper into it, really. It comes from Gary Oak.
Thank you. In many ways, Simon Crean has built the brand that is Labor. With that in mind, do you think that he acted in the best interests of the Labor Party on Thursday when he sought to bring the leadership tension, once and for all?
Christine Nixon, you know Simon Crean reasonably well.
I do.
What's your assessment?
I do. I was watching the whole episode, and I'd actually been up in Parliament House earlier in the week and had met with a number of people, and then I sort of sat there and watched it, and I think Simon Crean did an amazing thing. I think he in some ways sacrificed himself to get the Labor Party to pay some attention to this issue and to think about settling it. And look, I think he's a great bloke. I think he's done a fantastic job, and I think it's a great shame that that he hasn't been able to remain. But I understand why not. But I think Simon did it for the best interests, and I think he should be given some credit for that. And these people...
Do you think, can I just interrupt there? Do you think he was really supporting Kevin Rudd, or was he drawing him out in the open where he could be shot down by Julia Gillard?
Well, I don't know about shot down. That's a nice word. I should know that, shouldn't I? But...
Let's say, should we just say handcuffed and thrown in the back of a paddy wagon?
No, it's worse. Look, I don't think so. I think that his motives were right. I think he was trying to just pull it on, see what happens, and hopefully get some resolution to this matter. And I think he did a good job.
Brendan O'Connor.
Well, whether I agree with him entirely in what he was wanting to do, I'm a very close friend of Simon's. I have high regard for him.
So do you know what he was trying to do?
Well, I think he was exasperated by the continued conflict and internal dissent that was going on, which was not, of course, providing any opportunity for the government to properly sell its message, to explain what it was doing, to put forward its ideas and policies. And that exasperation led to him calling for a spill, which is a very big thing to do. That in itself, of course, has led to, in my view, a line drawn in the sand where I don't think you'll see further internal dissent and you'll see a unity of purpose. Now, for that reason, I think it has turned out that Simon's approach, I think, has allowed us to clear a way forward.
Well, should you be actually thanking him rather than seeing him leave?
Clearly, he made some points on the day of the doorstop on Thursday.
I would like to be Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah,
for example.
That's right. And he made and look, no one doubts that someone of his seniority shouldn't be able to hold those views. But
Wayne Swan might disagree.
Well, Wayne Swan would agree that he should be Deputy Prime Minister. I think the point is, though, whatever the detail of what he was seeking to do, Tony, I think the most important thing is it led to, I think, a showdown which will culminate in the caucus being united. And that is absolutely critical if we're going to have a genuine contest on the 14th of September.
Kelly O'Dwyer. Simon Crean was a sacrificial lamb who did the right thing by the party, just accidentally wanted to be Deputy Prime Minister along the way.
Well, look, I think it's a very interesting explanation about what's gone on. But I must say I take it with somewhat of a grain of salt. Simon Crean, I think, is a decent person. I think in politics you come across people on all sides, some of whom are more decent than others, and I would put Simon in that category. He, of course, is also a North Melbourne supporter, of which I am also one, so that also elevates him in my eyes. But the point, though, that Simon made when he was doing his doorstop, when he in fact did say he was going to challenge for Deputy Leader, was not just one of leadership and needing to change from the Prime Minister over to Kevin Rudd. Certainly that was his main point. But he also said that there was a fundamental sickness in the Labor Party right now. He said that there was a fundamental sickness in the way that they were actually governing. He said that the processes of Cabinet were dysfunctional, that there was deep, deep hatreds and divisions from within the party. And he said that there was this whole division politics that was being played out on the Australian stage. You know, class, race, gender. I think the Australian public are entirely sick of this division politics. I think Simon Crean is entirely sick of this division politics. And, you know, I hope that you're right, that we are going to see an end to that.
Is Tony Abbott sick of division politics?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, he hasn't played the gender card. He hasn't played... he hasn't played the division card in that sense. I mean, he hasn't been trying to divide the Australian people. I mean, people might laugh about that, but I actually think the true test of leadership is to actually unite people, not to divide them. And I think what this Prime Minister has sought to do on every opportunity is to actually divide the Australian people rather than looking at what is in the best national interest, looking at the challenges that face us as a nation and looking to how we can actually solve those challenges together. And I think that's very disappointing.
Okay, let's take this a little... Thank you. Let's take this a little broader. And the next question tonight comes from Bridie O'Donnell.
Thank you. To borrow a phrase from the Essendon Football Club, We seem to have embraced this whatever it takes attitude, not only in elite sport, but we see it in banking, in mining, in business, and undoubtedly in politics. Does the panel think that we're losing our sense of community and replacing it with a self-serving ethos designed only to protect our position and then allow chaos to ensue below us?
Let's start with Anthony Grayling's philosophical side to that question. I think you should feel comfortable with it. You can speak broadly, you don't have to necessarily reflect on Australian politics.
Well, this is a great philosophical answer coming up. Yes and no. There is an aspect to whatever it takes which is good and positive, and that is that if you're really keen on something and you're prepared to put in the effort, do the work, accept all the challenges that are involved, I mean, all those wonderful cliches, no less true for being so, then that's terrific. People should do what they do with all their heart and soul if they're really serious about it. But if the phrase means that you can cheat, you can lie, you can deceive, you can do things behind the scenes that undermine general confidence in the country, or that those connections of probity that are so important in personal relationships, then no, you can't accept the whatever it takes philosophy. So if it meant the good thing, the positive thing, absolutely. And that would be a personal thing, your own personal commitment. But if it did mean cheating and deceiving, then I just don't think it's acceptable. And alas, in too many spheres, especially with the professionalisation of sport, but also with the high stakes, personal stakes for people in politics, too often it means the negative thing, and that we shouldn't accept.
Brendan Gale, what do you think?
Look, I think the major sporting clubs in Australia are essentially community-based organisations. The public essentially own those organisations. They invest a lot of faith and confidence in clubs and soccer clubs and football clubs. The AFL, the big football codes, they're extremely competitive environments, and yes, some are prepared to do whatever it takes to get that extra sort of millimetre of performance or extra percent of performance and improvement, and provides a great contest and a great spectacle and makes sport what it is in Australia. But I think events of the last 4 or 5 months have certainly given us cause to be introspective and to think not so much about what we're prepared to do, but I think we need to have an acute sense of what we wouldn't do in pursuit of success, because otherwise the public, the community which invests so much in sport, I mean, you lose them. And the events of the last few weeks in particular have been a great opportunity for introspection.
What about what has been done? Was the whatever it takes principle behind this whole drugs in sport scandal? You mentioned it there. Do you think that was the motivating factor?
I think it's about performance. I think it's about the preparation of athletes, the conditioning of athletes, and trying to get that extra percent of performance. And this is
does it go to the culture of clubs? Because it now seems that ASADA is focusing on individual sports people rather than clubs. Initially, when they came out, it said it's all about the clubs. What do you think?
Well, it was, and it was a great opportunity for clubs to review their procedures and their people and their risk. But I mean, there's only so much clubs can do in the circumstances. You can put in place a whole range of measures and procedures and be really careful about the people you bring in to organisation. But at the end of the day, you can't. It's hard to prevent individuals from acting independently away from the club. And
is that what you think's been going on?
Well,
we're really puzzled. We don't know what's been going on.
Well, neither do we.
A lot of confusion about it.
I mean, I've read the Crime Commission report. There's some very sort of general findings. I mean, there's a whole series of, I guess, details that sit behind that concern us, and the codes and leagues have been briefed, and they're concerning.
I'm going to go back to our questioner. Bridie's got a hand up.
Well, as someone who has competed in sport at elite level, what I find challenging though is that what we see with elite athletes often is there actually are a very disempowered group, other than those who are making a large amount of money from their sport, which is a very small percentage. We have a lot of Olympic athletes who are probably at all times partly desperate, partly anxious, often injured, often desperately trying to make selection. So it's perhaps part of the problem is the general public and society's expectation of performance, medals, winning, that kind of thing. It's not just about sport that we see on TV every weekend, and I have to say that AFL dominates our sporting public. It's all the other sports where actually people have sacrificed time, energy, lives and other careers.
Brendan, quick response, and I'd like to hear from George on this as well.
Look, I mean, it's a fair point, but the other thing I think we need to be mindful of is we're creating a culture, I guess, of a group of athletes in this country that are accommodated and they're regimented, they're organised, and it's football clubs and sporting clubs can be a little military, I guess, at times. And the thing that I'm concerned about is that we're getting young athletes, males, females, come into those environments and aren't getting the opportunity to exercise their own judgment on matters and make mistakes. And because we're fearful of the consequences, getting smashed in the papers and the media, so it's a bit of a vicious cycle, I guess. But.
George? Well, up until the last couple of weeks, I think sport was the last institution Australians wanted to believe in, because you look at your parliament, your main parties and your minor parties, you look at your business sector, your finance sector especially, your churches, your trade union movements. Basically, there's been a loss of respect across every organisation. And this is not just in Australia, it's across Western society at the moment. And for some reason, this is maybe a counterintuitive thing that Australians do. They assume that their sporting clubs were a little above this thing, because there's something that sport has which politics is trying to ape, but politics has now gone completely over the top. Sport is about the contest, and the process leading up to the contest is discussed, but nobody ever predicts the score on a daily basis before the game is played. Whereas politics has now got into this position where you're guessing the result of the election with this relentless polling. Now, how sport got itself into this position, I don't think it asked for this position, and I certainly don't think the elite athlete asked to be a role model. But of course, once a kid pays to buy your poster, or once they put their parents' hard-earned money for a footy club membership, and of course you'll all renew your Richmond Club memberships now, because this table is stacked with 2 Tiger fans. But think about it. In a way, it's just been not a race down, but it's been a search for something to want to believe in. And I feel a bit disappointed, in a sense, as a footy fan myself and as a sporting fan, that it sort of came to this, that we'd over-invested in this particular institution because every one of the other ones had let us down, and suddenly we realised that there are human beings abusing drugs in sport, and there's organised crime wanting to get their hooks into individual athletes, and of course the other thing, and this goes back to the whatever it take points, to your whatever it takes point. The culture now is not just an instant gratification. We're in this very, very hot, cold position now where you're either the best thing that's ever happened, and of course, as soon as you turn out to be a human being again, you are definitely the worst thing I've ever seen. Yeah. And it's really time to tear you down, because we've got another popular.
That actually does throw to. I was going to throw to Christine Nixon at this stage. You know, the whatever it takes principle must surely also apply in the Victorian Police.
Oh, look, I'm never usually short of words, but here you go. No, look, I think policing went through a stage some years ago where...
I'm actually talking about the top leadership, where they continually seem to be tearing each other down.
Look,
in a sort of way similar to politics. Yeah, it's done now with you, but then there was someone else and got done to him as well.
And hopefully that's the end of it. And I think, a lot of people learned a lot of lessons out of that process, and so hopefully that's not the case. But there's a bigger picture, and I think it's really interesting that George raises this issue around so many institutions and our lack of respect in those institutions. I think, that a lot of people have to start to take a serious look, football clubs, politicians, government, a whole range of people, about what happened to the respectfulness that we should have, what happened to the substance of our institutions. I mean, your point about communities. I mean, we in government, we in, the sporting world, I think owe our communities an enormous amount. And I think we have to start to say, how do you get that respect back? How do we get respect back into Parliament? How do we get language in Parliament that doesn't denigrate both sides? And I think, it's a challenge for us all, but it's something we should start to think about.
I've got a couple of people with their hands up in the audience. We'll take the gentleman with the red striped shirt first. Sorry, we'll come to you in a minute. Go ahead.
I was just interested in the panel's view of who should really be accountable for all that's happened in the AFL, particularly with the Essendon side of things, and talking about leadership. Who should be held accountable or most accountable for this? Is it the club? Is it the AFL itself? And Demetrio, talking about leadership, who do we think should be held most accountable for what's happened?
Brendan.
Well, I think it's a collective responsibility, and I think the clubs have to work really hard in providing environments where things like this don't happen, or they do, or things that have been alleged, and when they do, they stand out. The AFL as a governing body has huge responsibilities as well. I think players are entitled to to assume that clubs are acting in their best interests always as well. I think fundamentally the responsibility is with the code and the clubs.
I'll just quickly go to Brendan O'Connor here. Now, the phrase "whatever it takes" actually coined by Graham Richardson. So, is the Labor Party responsible for everything that's going wrong in the world?
I don't think Richo can actually claim that phrase was his. He put it on the front page of his book. I do, and I also think, and that was about 25 years ago. So let's just.
Oh no, you've missed whatever it takes too.
Let's you know what? Let's not romanticise too much of the past, and let's not put too much pressure on the exemplars today. People in sport, I think, generally are role models. They do great work, and I think most people in politics are honest. I think there are bad eggs in every sector of our community, in business, in politics, in sport, but the majority of people, I think, in the main, seek to do the right thing. But there are human failings, and I think that the difference, though, Tony, is that when it comes, the one thing sport and politics have in common, and as do some other areas, is that when it comes to the scrutiny that they're under, if someone acts improperly, it is elevated to the front pages and in the back pages of newspapers and so on. Now, that's not to suggest for a moment we haven't got issues, and that's why I think making sure that people do the right thing and are held to account in politics is absolutely critical, and making sure that we scrutinise the conduct of people that are in positions of society is absolutely critical. But I do think sometimes that the reputation of sport or politics can be traduced without any qualification, and I think that's unfair because it's inaccurate.
The qualification I would put on it in the case of the Labor Party is the New South Wales Labor Party. But we need to move on. It's you're watching Q&A. Our next question comes from David O'Connor, hopefully no relation to the Minister.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. My question is to the Honourable Minister of Immigration. Is it why do we have workers currently working here on 457 visas taking the work of locally experienced tradespeople, forcing those people to work elsewhere or at worst to stay unemployed? And I'll make reference to the job, a government job down the road, 5 minutes away. Yeah. I'd like to answer that, please.
Sure. Firstly, I should say no relation that I'm aware of, David. But look, this is an important area. We have identified some deficiencies with the 457 scheme. When it was established a long time ago now, it was set up to ensure that temporary skill shortages were filled by temporary skilled labour, and that is the way in which the majority of the 457 applicants and applications proceed. But what we identified recently, in fact the department identified it in late 2011, and late last year the department and the Ministerial Advisory Council referred the matters to my predecessor, Chris Bowen. They identified that there was an increased number of people coming in that were not filling shortages, and that's why we've sought to make announcements about reforming the 457 visa approach to ensure that areas where there are no shortages, we don't allow for 457 applications to come in. That was never the basis upon which the scheme was to operate. Let's be very clear, though, in this context, Tony, because I think it's very important.
Well, actually, can we just... we just heard this case raised, a very specific one by David O'Connor.
Yeah.
And look, when you were first asked about this, you couldn't actually raise many cases.
There are plenty under examination.
So do you know about this case that he's talking about?
Well, I can talk to David. Of course, I'm aware of an incident that was in the public domain. Is that the one to which you refer? Where there's been some conflict, and of course, I've had the department examine that matter. I mean, I don't disclose publicly matters under examination. That would be improper of me. But what we found was, using macro evidence, was that the total employment growth rate, first of all, the total employment growth rate of this country was far, far lower than the spike of employment growth in 457s. And what we also found, which was of concern to me, was that the nominal and real weights of certain occupational groups in certain sectors was falling falling at a time where there's supposed to be shortages in those occupations. That was telling the government that there was something seriously amiss, which is why we've looked to identify those problems. Now, this is not... This is very important.
We've got a few questions on this subject, so you have to say absolutely.
No, I just want to make it very clear. This is about 3 possible forms of exploitation. This is about the 457 applicant who might be brought in on a dressed-up job and paid less. It might be the local worker who actually does have the tickets, does have the skills and doesn't get the job, even though there was no shortage, so local workers can miss out. And it also can be the employer who's done the right thing, sponsoring applicants the right way, against their competitor who's actually misusing the scheme. So we do have to think about this broadly. The reforms will be put to the Parliament. I think we need to make sure we've got some rigour.
All right, George Megalogiannis.
The specific issues on 457 are obviously important, but my big question to the Minister and to both sides of politics, we've been sweating the small stuff on the immigration issue. Whether it's stop the boats or whether it's putting Aussie workers at the front of the queue. Look, I've just come back from China and I was on a speaking tour there last week, and from the Peking University down, from the elites, the sons and daughters of the elites in China, everyone wants to come here. Now, very few countries get the opportunity that Australia's got in the next 5 or 10 years. It's almost like a gold rush, but a gold rush in terms of the brain economy, not in the physical economy of digging gold. And a lot of people want to come here, but we've seemed to have taken our political debate to the same place we were in 2010 when we were trying to talk population control and slowing the immigration intake. I'm not downplaying the specific issues, but in terms of your big national debate, the government attacking its own program and the coalition getting antsy about a couple of unauthorised arrivals is not the big picture to me.
Is there global competition? Is there global competition for those best brains, as you refer to it?
There's not much competition at the moment because, as I say, I can give you the report back from Asia. Now, this doesn't actually affect the 457s. This affects the size and the quality of your immigration intake. If you've got the best brains in Asia all queuing, people were coming up to me asking me, how do I get a visa? Like, I'm not an immigration official or a foreign affairs official, so I'm not going to answer that question for them. But it struck me that the reputation Australia has globally is nothing like the political debate we have at home. There's so much self-loathing in politics today, and I know there are big issues out there in the election in terms of cost of living. You know, I mean, the thing is a real issue. Service delivery, infrastructure, these things are problems. And, of course, specific issues with this big restructure going on in the economy for the manufacturing sector, for a lot of blue-collar labour. I have full sympathy on each of those issues, but I'll tell you, you're not going to grow a terrific Australia by trying to close the place down. And again, and I make this point to both sides of politics, by sweating the small stuff. The government's 457 program, you know, you're attacking your own program here.
Well, let me just explain that.
Hang on a second. We've got a questioner down the front here. I'd just like to hear from the audience as well.
It's a question of scale and priority.
I'm an unemployed boilermaker welder in the area. I was down at that peaceful picket line where the helicopters flew the 457s in. And let it be known that I love immigration. It wouldn't have been for all these people in this country, from other countries that have made this country. I want to let that known for a fact. And I don't know whether it's a ploy by a previous government to try and bring down our wages and conditions. And why would you have a fully qualified boilermaker on the dole when you put a 457 person in that position?
Okay. I'll hear from Kelly O'Dwyer here, and I'd like to hear from Mr. Payne. Go ahead.
Well, look, I was very interested in the timeline that the Minister just mentioned now when he was talking about these issues being raised in 2011 in the Immigration Department and raised with the Minister, because the previous Minister was asked a question about 457 visas less than a month ago, and he said that he thought that the balance was right on 457 visas. I agree with George. I think that 457 visas allow us to plug skill shortages in Australia. It actually helps us to grow our economy. But of course, we don't want to see rorting of the 457 visas. And from everything I was just listening to from the Minister just now, he has not given one clean, clear example of widespread rorting. Well, we have actually asked for a copy of the reports that have been done by the Immigration Department.
So what about the questioner has got his hand up here? We'll quickly go back to you. You want to respond to that? Go ahead.
Just want to let you know too, while we're on that peaceful picket line, those poor 457 Filipino welders, they had to work in the dark at 4 o'clock in the morning. There was no lighting. There was a crane lifting over their heads, and those poor buggers I actually said to the CEO of Melbourne Water, what would happen if that man came out of here dead in an ambulance? What would you think then? And if this is a ploy by the previous government on work choices, and this is what our future's going to be, I'll tell you now.
Kelly O'Dwyer, is what you're listening to a genuine case? You say there are no cases, but you're hearing this...
No, I'm saying... No, I was very clear. I said what the Minister is talking about is widespread rorting of the 457 visas. I think in all circumstances we may be able to pick out one or two situations where in fact there may be problems, and I don't know about the case that's being spoken about, but certainly I don't think one example is an example of widespread rorting. And I think if the Minister is in fact concerned about these issues, I simply ask the question, why is it that they actually reduced the compliance and monitoring budget of the Immigration Department to actually look at whether or not the conditions of the 457 visas were being adhered to? They cut $20 million from the budget. Now the Minister is seeking to bring in new legislation which actually says that he has no confidence in the department whatsoever. He wants the Fair Work Ombudsman to adjudicate
I want to step
in
away
these
from
circumstances.
the politicians for a minute. Brendan Gale, you're listening to this argument. What are you thinking?
George is making a lot of sense tonight, and I liked an idea. He's a tiger. He's a tiger. An idea had currency a few years ago, which I liked, was this notion of the big Australia, and it's lost a bit of momentum since. But we're a big country physically. We've got a tiny population, and we seem to squabble over these issues and matters which serve as obstacles to growing the population. And we have to grow, and I think, we grow. We provide a local market for our manufacturing to become competitive and export. It makes investments in public transport feasible. We're too small, and I understand that's a tough political sell in some of the big growth corridors in Sydney and Victoria, but the debate's gone. I can't recall hearing it much since the last election. So I'm big into growth, and we've got a big country, and we've got big tickers, and we should grow.
Let's hear from AC Grayling. You heard similar debates in Britain, obviously, when Britain entered the European community, and huge numbers of foreign workers, or considered to be foreign workers by the Brits, came into the UK. What's your reflection on this?
Well, it's a universal problem. All the rich countries or richer countries are magnets for people who want to go there. And it's very vexing and troubling for local people, who feel that their jobs are being taken by immigrants. But the truth of the matter is, particularly in Europe, which has an ageing population, and it needs immigration, in fact, needs and wants skilled people to come in. And in a country like Australia, which is indeed physically huge with a relatively small population, the future requires an input of people with energy and ambition. And the thing about migrants, if you think about things from their point of view, these are people who are uprooting themselves, are taking a big gamble in life. They want to better themselves. They want to go somewhere where there are opportunities. It's a fantastic vote of confidence in Australia that it is so attractive to people. And so you get people who are courageous and ambitious. Obviously there are going to be some people who want to freeload. That's there's always the kind of minority who are bad eggs. But generally speaking, they're going to be people who will come and make a major contribution here. And if we all remember, we're all of us immigrants or descendants from immigrants in one way or another, and we look back at our own ancestors, even just a few generations ago, and think of them, think of the risk they took, think of the desire that they had to make something of themselves and to go somewhere where there were those opportunities. And I think the welcoming attitude is, providing that there are safeguards in place, but the welcoming attitude is the right attitude.
Okay, Brendan O'Connor wants to respond. And can I just throw it in as a question, listening to the debate going around the table?
I agree with you.
But are you in danger of frightening off the sort of smart migrants that George is talking about, who look at the debate here and see the rhetoric is, we don't want foreigners?
Well, I think there has been this debate has been framed incorrectly by some in the media. I've made it very, very clear that we need immigration to build this country, that I'm a migrant. I came here when I was 6. My parents, with 3 of their 4 kids, came here. I lived in a Nissan hut. They were factory workers at the time. I am a story of, like many, many Australians, of a magnificent opportunity to come to this country and make something of yourself, and hopefully put back into the country that's allowed that. I believe in having decent immigration levels. Our demography...
Do you believe in a big Australia? That was a phrase that seemed to scare a lot of politicians.
Let me just say this. Our demography demands that we have significant immigration levels because of our ageing population. Let me explain why the 457 routes must be removed.
Okay, can you do that briefly, because we've got other topics.
Well, if people don't have confidence in a temporary skills stream, then they will be opposed to things like immigration. You have to ensure that locals get opportunities. That is not denying the fact that we don't have a permanent skill stream. In fact, 2/3 of our permanent migration is skilled. But what we do not want to have happen is people lose faith in that because they're missing out themselves in opportunities.
Okay.
That's the balance we need to get.
Quick, George, because we've got a few other topics to get.
Which is really a workplace relations debate, become a debate about whether Aussies should be...
Well, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because I'll tell you why.
The Prime Minister introduced that phrase.
A newspaper chose to phone up Pauline Hanson and stick her on the front page of that newspaper when she's an irrelevancy. They chose to do that.
All right. Okay, let's go to another aspect of the immigration debate. We've got two questions. Our first comes from Carol Muir. The second question comes from Fadak Al-Fayyad.
Thanks, Tony. My question's in relation to funding of the implementation of government policy. I'm the CEO of a local Uniting Care agency, Werribee Support and Housing. And we support government policy of community detention for asylum seekers, but at this point we're in urgent need of support for the response of our emergency relief program. 150 asylum seekers are moving into Wyndham every 6 weeks. And for a period of 12 months, this will continue to occur, and they're eligible for the support of our service. Wyndham is already one of the fastest growing municipalities in Australia. And the additional strain that places on local community support services is somewhat overwhelming, and for the first time in 13 years, in February, we actually ran out of food vouchers for our program. So my question is, asylum seekers aren't permitted to work, and the emergency relief program right across the nation is diminishing and is incredibly stretched. So my question is, what plans does government have to try to relieve some of these growing pressures, particularly within a growth corridor where the demands for service are tremendous?
All right, pause on your answers because we've got a second question on the same subject. Comes from, thank you, from Fadak Al-Fayyad.
My question, I work with refugees who've just been released into the community, most on bridging visas. They have no right to work or study and receive no Centrelink benefits. I've met people living in extreme poverty and starvation. Why do we have such racist policies towards refugees, knowing that clearly people will still come to Australia because they are escaping things we cannot even try to imagine? I myself have come from Iraq, which ironically has been invaded by Australia. But don't we have a responsibility towards these people?
Okay. Let's go from Brendan Gow first.
Well, I think we do, because I think we should open up our country and our hearts and our minds, and because of the points I've made before. And the other thing is, I think if you're prepared to risk everything, and we've seen that sadly too often, I reckon you're going to make every post a winner. I think you're going to contribute. I think you're going to be a productive person, so.
Christine Nixon, can I come to you on this? Just because the police in Western Sydney have been feeding on the concerns, have been feeding their concerns about conditions of these people on community detention to shock jocks in Western Sydney. Suddenly there was a case of an alleged sexual assault, and the whole thing became explosive. Give us your thoughts on what you're hearing about what's happening here.
I think the sense of us being a country that should, that's grown and is what it is because of immigration, is something that none of us should forget. I think we do not treat people in the way that they should. I think they should be allowed to work. I understand all of it. But I also understand that one of the reasons why this debate goes on is in called the media and is some of those shock jocks you're talking about. Now, whether or not, whether the police fed them or not, if it wasn't the police, someone else would, so it doesn't really matter. But that's then, makes politicians back and lose some courage, and the other side gets a point, and so we go. And so we get driven by a media response rather than the really decent, solid policy response, which says, look, you can't let people go out there and die because they can't find anything to eat. And I think that's the problem. And so I think we have to think about, being tougher than some of the sort of criticism from the media and just stay focused on the issue. We need to support people and we need to let them work.
Brendan O'Connor.
Look, this is a...
What's the government going to do about it was the first question.
Sure, look, and I'll go to that. But you've actually had two questions at once, and I'm happy to talk to them at the same time. This is a very vexed issue for any first world country. We have more than 40 million people displaced around the world. And at least a third, if not more, of them will be determined as refugees by the UNHCR. And indeed, this country has recently increased its humanitarian program to take 20,000 per annum. And if you look at that on per capita basis, that's now the highest in the world, and it's the second highest in terms of settlement, to make sure we provide opportunities for people that are fleeing persecution. But of course, when it comes to dealing with these issues, there is a discord on occasion in the community. When it's not bipartisan, when the two major parties are not agreeing, this issue becomes terribly fractured, and that is a crying shame. Insofar as the first question, look, in relation to support required, we have a lot of service providers and we know the NGOs do great work. I'm very happy to examine the matter you've raised specifically about resources, because we do want to ensure that people are provided with sufficient support. I am glad that we can place people in alternative forms of detention, particularly families. We don't want them in detention centres or if we do, it's should be for a short
period. I'm just going to bring you to the second question before I go to other people. The second question claimed people in community detention here are living in extreme poverty, and that's inevitable, isn't it, when they can't work, when they can't study, and they can't even get Centrelink benefits?
Well, they do receive benefits obviously of a modest level. There's no doubt about that.
Why can't they work?
Well, let me just get to the point about, you said there was nothing being provided to people, and that's not true. But I'm not suggesting for a moment that it's a very significant resource. It is obviously it is a smaller amount than Australians get on unemployment benefits, but they do get forms of assistance. And there's a big debate within Australia about the extent to which we provide that support. We have relatively low unemployment in this country, but we still have over 600,000 Australians unemployed, and they're not receiving a great deal more than those people who are, of course, seeking our support in the community. So I think it's unfair to characterise this as not providing any support. In relation to the work rights, the Houston panel made 22 recommendations in order to look to see if we could deter vessels coming in such a dangerous way. Only tonight there were 2 further casualties when a young boy, I'm advised, and a woman perished 14 nautical miles north of Christmas Island. I was on Christmas Island on the 15th of December 2010, only hours after 50 people perished after foundering on the rocks, men, women and children. We have taken the advice of Angus Houston, Michael Estrange and Paris Aristotle, because they are 3 eminent Australians looking at a way that we can deal with this very complex area of public policy. Now, we have not implemented all of those recommendations, but one of them also went to work rights. But I am looking at that issue. I've had a number of meetings with representatives to see what we can do there. But
so are you considering a change to the work rights issue? In other words, will people on community detention theoretically be able to work here if you come to a decision?
Well, people were provided an opportunity before August 12th. The recommendations make clear that is acting as a inducement to get on unseaworthy vessels, which on occasion, of course, lead to the deaths of people
Okay,
at sea.
no, you've made that point. Let's just go back to this issue.
I'm concerned about the level of support. There is no decision to be made by government in relation to changing that work arrangement. But what I have done, and I've been in the portfolio for a short time, is I'm speaking with those advocates and others about this particular issue, because I understand the difficulty that people are confronting.
All right, George, want to get into that briefly?
It's a very big issue, and we indulge politics routinely when the rhetoric is a little more aggressive than the reality of the problem. But on this particular issue, and since 2001, there's been a competition on both sides of policy to see who could be tougher with asylum seekers. Now, for me, the numbers do not add up. So if you know that at least 70% are going to be found to be genuine refugees, you begin with a system that presumes guilt. So it's all about punish, not deterrence. It's about punishing the people who already got here. And I'll tell you, this is one of the most difficult things I've had to cover in the sort of last 10 years of my career. It's hard to keep a straight face and think that this is actually a serious debate when you're reporting on this thing. These are human beings, and it's never been any different. And Australians in the past were able to separate the political fights from what you actually did to human beings. But Australians value social safety net, egalitarianism, a fair go. As I said, there's been a competition on both sides of politics. Who did what to whom is sort of way beyond the point now. You've now got a Labor government wanting to punish people who are more likely than not bound to be found as genuine refugees. And I'm not sure how anyone can think that this is situation normal.
All right, we're fast running out of time. Thank you. So, as I said, we're fast running out of time. You're watching Q&A. Our last question tonight comes from Lynn Shanahan.
Hi, I've worked in aged care and disability for some years, and I recognise that older people, including those with dementia and other disabilities, have a right to sexual intimacy. Some of those older people no longer have control of their finances, their medical or care decisions, and have a guardian or a power of attorney who are then responsible for those issues. To me, that raises a legal and a philosophical question around if a person's been judged to no longer have the capacity to make decisions, who deems consent for sexual interactions?
A question for lawyers and philosophers. Let's start with a philosopher.
Well, the general principle that lies behind the idea that elderly people could be entitled to or be allowed to have access to sexual services seems to me an extremely good one. I mean, somebody once said that old age is no place for the faint-hearted, and one of the reasons why that's so is because of the lack of lots of opportunities to form relationships or to have intimate contact. And, you know, human beings, because we're essentially social creatures, need our chance of intimacy, need to be able to make contact with other people, need to be touched, hugged, given a kiss. And there's no reason why, just because you have a few decades on board, you shouldn't also have sexual feelings. And so this seems to me, the very idea of there being sexual services for old people seems to me an immensely kind idea. It seems a very positive, warm attitude towards human reality and human feeling.
Why is there such a social taboo talking about aged people, old people and sex?
Oh, well, I suppose it's the sort of dirty old man idea, the brown man. I think you know, if old men and old women have a few dirty thoughts from time to time, all the better for them. So I'm in favour of it. So far as the legality of it is concerned, all the prohibitionist attitudes about sex work, for example, or about just about consensual human relationships in general, and that includes attitudes towards homosexuality also, they seem to me deeply misguided. What we ought to do is we ought to celebrate the opportunity, the possibility for people when they want it, when they consent to it, when they take great pleasure and enjoyment from it, and also accrue all the health benefits from it, can have an opportunity to be in touch with other human beings and accrue the benefits.
Can I just go back to our questioner? So we'll get a microphone to our questioner down there in the front row of the back. There we go. We still haven't got a microphone to you, but what I'm going to ask you is, no, down there, our questioner. It's there in the second row. Stand up so we can see where you are. Thank you very much. We'll get a microphone to you. I just want to, you raised this issue, and is it a hypothetical one from your point of view, or have you seen actual cases where people with dementia have been having sex in old age people's institutions or homes, and people have found it very hard to deal with this issue?
I certainly have worked in dementia units where people have had sexual relations within the unit, not with a sex worker. And it does raise issues for the staff, for the families of those involved. Sometimes they may have a partner outside of the aged care facility. There's all sorts of questions that come up that are a bit a dilemma.
Okay, we'll go to Kelly O'Dwyer. That's the serious side of the story, and that's the question that's been posed. What do you see as the legal impediments here? Who should make the decisions?
Well, I'm not sure I'm as qualified as Anthony to actually give a view on this topic. But
what, being so young?
Well, no. I'm not a philosophical expert, is what I'm suggesting. But obviously, human intimacy is incredibly important throughout our lives. I would absolutely agree with you on that. I suppose the question for me is around intention and around consent, which you pointed out. I think we have to be very careful that people, for instance, who might suffer from dementia are actually consenting to whatever relationship we're talking about entering into here. And for me, people with dementia who perhaps require extra special care and consideration, we need to be very careful and tread, I think, quite warily when it comes to that sort of consent and whether that is in fact informed consent.
Okay, we're running out of time. We've got a question down the front. I'm going to go to you in a second, but I just want to hear from Brendan.
Am I allowed to say what he said?
You can say let's look ahead to the time when you're perhaps not sort of so upright and fit.
Who loses here? I mean, that's the comment I'd make. Even in the absence of informed consent, I mean, who loses? Who's harmed here?
Let's quickly go down to... We are really nearly out of time, but you have had your hand up for a while, so let's go to you.
Hi, my name is Natasha, and this is a slightly off tangent of the question. Looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we see the concept of sexuality almost at the base of the pyramid and morality right at the tip. And my question is, why do you think we as a society will place so much emphasis on horrific, graphic, traumatising, violent issues versus sexuality, and even within the elderly community, why do you think that has become such
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to take that as a comment because we are nearly out of time. Let's just go. We'll hear from the rest of the panel. George, what are your thoughts?
Wanting to say, you can take this as no comment because I don't have anything to add. But look, I think the fundamental question always when you seek to prohibit something is why would you treat this particular group of our community differently? And that's always the first principal question to ask. So if you think they shouldn't have sex, that's a pretty difficult argument, I think, to mount. So if you think they should, there I go, I've done it. Unintended consequence.
Well, look, I think the fact, Tony, that this question that was asked and we're asked to respond, to me, is a very positive sign that we are now discussing the rights of people with disability. It's quite often, they've been left out. We've had debates on gender debates and race debates and about how we respect people and how they deserve to be treated with dignity. This area has been, I think, neglected by our society too long, and that question, to me, exemplifies the need to have discussions about people who've been ignored, disregarded for too long.
Christine Dixon, I'll give you the final word.
Look, I think it's about time we grew up, we thought about the needs of people with disability, with dementia, whatever, listened to what they said and did as what they wanted, and I think it would be important for all of us to give them that recognition as human beings.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. We're, in fact, over time. Please thank our panel, AC Grayling, Kelly O'Dwyer, Brendan Gale, Christine Nixon, Brendan O'Connor and George Megalogenis. Thank you. Thank you. Very special thanks to the Wyndham Cultural Centre and our wonderful audience here at Werribee. You can quickly give yourself another big round of applause. Thank you. Okay, next week, Next week, we'll take advantage of Easter Monday to steer away from politics towards God and faith. Sorry you can't join us, Anthony. I believe you're flying to Texas tomorrow. But our panel will include the Catholic Archbishop of Brisbane, Mark Coleridge, committed atheist, comedian and actor Josh Thomas, Buddhist nun Rabina Curtin, and devout Jewish atheist, singer and songwriter Deborah Conway. Until then, good night.